Hello, college sports fans. It has been a little while since I'd last talked about college volleyball. There's been so much great college football content to get into, but now that non-conference play is wrapping up and we had multiple big matchups this past Wednesday to get into, I felt like this was the best time to do a bit of an update on the college volleyball standings and season. So let's just jump right into it. First off, want to say the Pittsburgh Panthers have been extremely impressive. They are the no doubt number one team in the country. Not only are they now 7-0 after defeating number 3 Penn State at home, but they have won the last 21 straight sets. They are 21-0, have not dropped a single set all season. They're the last team in the country, obviously, to do that, and they're 7-0 as a result, the no doubt number one team. And that game against Penn State, who again was the third ranked team in the country, undefeated in their own right. They were 8-0 heading into the game, and yet it really just wasn't all that close. Pittsburgh generally beat them pretty easily and beat them by at least, I want to say, I think it was at least five, maybe it was by at least 5 or 6 in each of the 3 sets. So even after the first set, when Penn State fought back a little bit in the second set, it ultimately wasn't all that close. Pittsburgh, extremely dominant. There might not be a team in the country that could beat them, except maybe Nebraska, who had a nice bounce back in another top 5 matchup on Wednesday night. They hosted number 2 Stanford, and not only did they beat Stanford, they swept Stanford 3-0. So the number 5 Cornhuskers, who lost a surprising game on the road against SMU, who's unranked, and SMU is a bit of a wild card team in the ACC this season. But Nebraska lost to SMU, and that's what dropped them from number 2 to number 5. I think with this dominant victory over Stanford, they will go right back to being the number 2 team in the country where they started from to begin this season. But an interesting thing to note, as I just mentioned, that SMU game was on the road. Nebraska has not been the same team on the road they have been at home. With that win over Stanford, that is now 31 straight home victories for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And at the end of this video, we're going to get into the preview of Nebraska at Louisville, which is the big time ABC game on Sunday, just barely in the afternoon. I think it starts at 12:30 Eastern time. It's the only college volleyball game on a primetime network like ABC all season. It's the first time that's happened in the regular season because of the growth of the sport. Now, speaking of Louisville, they had a massive game. They bluegrass battle against their arch rival Kentucky. Louisville is number 4 in the country. Kentucky is number 11 in the country. Kentucky was only 6-3 heading into this game, but they've already faced some really tough competition, including Penn State, who they almost beat the Nittany Lions. They were up 2-0, but blew a 2-set lead and lost to Penn State 3-2 in one of the most thrilling matchups of the season earlier in the year. Now they're trying to upset their arch rival Louisville, and while they were able to win one of the sets, it just wasn't anything good. Louisville was just way too good, as way too much talent, and the Cardinals won 3-1, which makes it 4 straight victories over their arch rival Kentucky. Both those teams tend to be really good at volleyball, and the state of Kentucky in general, with teams like Western Kentucky and even teams like Northern Kentucky, who's not too bad. That state is producing a lot of strong volleyball teams, so it's always good when those two go head to head. All right, now to talk about Louisville. They're 8-1, of course, now, and Kentucky drops to 6-4. But again, they face some really tough competition, so they still may be a very interesting team come SEC play. Speaking of interesting teams come SEC play, let's talk about the defending national champions, Texas, who's number 8 in the country currently. They started the year number 1, but they have been all over the place. They've been completely up and down, and currently their record is just 4-3 after they defeated number 20 Baylor, a former Big 12 rival, 3-0. So they dominated Baylor on the road. That was a pretty good win for Texas. But heading into that game, they were only 3-3. They've really, really struggled. But they have the talent there. They returned so much of their production from last year that again won the national championship. So despite their 4-3 record, they could be a very intriguing team in the SEC coming up in SEC play. And it's kind of unclear who's going to win that league because Tennessee, in my opinion, has been a little underwhelming as well. They're currently number 15, but I believe they're going to drop because they recently suffered a tough loss. So Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, to me, it's all kind of up in the air. Florida, we'll just have to see how it shapes out between all of those teams. Now, there's one other game really wanted to get into here, which is another top 10 matchup. This one was a shocker. I would not have predicted this one right if I had predicted this one. Number 6 Purdue at number 10 Kansas. This is a rematch of last year where Purdue at home defeated Kansas in 5 sets. So the Jayhawks surprisingly played Purdue very, very close last year. This time it's in Lawrence, but I still expected Purdue was undefeated heading into the matchup. They were 8-0. Kansas was 7-0. So both undefeated teams. This was on Thursday night. Another great matchup, but Kansas won 3-1 at home. They surprisingly had the edge throughout the game. So now the Jayhawks are 8-0 and the Boilermakers fall to 8-1. I was pretty shocked by that one. And interestingly enough, both of those teams are about to play number 9 Creighton, who's already had an insanely tough schedule. I mean, the Creighton Blue Jays have practically played every single top tier team in college volleyball so far. So those two teams, interestingly enough, are going to play each other right before conference play begins. Now, I said I had a preview here, and that is the Nebraska at Louisville game. I'm going to talk about this game real quick, and we'll wrap the video up with this. Nebraska is currently number 5 in the country, but to me, they're the number 2 team as of right now. Louisville's currently number 4 in the country, but to me, they're the number 3 or 4 team, depending on whether you want to switch them with Penn State or not. So this is a legit, top tier battle of heavyweights in Louisville, though, where Nebraska again has struggled on the road so far this season. They both have very impressive games so far. I guess Louisville would be number 4 because they did play Penn State earlier this season and they lost 3-0. So they did get dominated by Penn State, so you can't really move them ahead of them. But they beaten Wisconsin 3-1, Tennessee 3-0, Creighton 3-2, and now they've beaten Kentucky 3-1. That's a lot of top tier teams that the Cardinals have already beaten this year. The Huskers, they shockingly lost to 3-0 on the road against SMU. 3-0. That was super surprising. The Mustangs weren't even ranked at the time. But since then, they've come back at home and beaten arch rival or one of their biggest rivals, Creighton, who's also a school in Nebraska. They beat Creighton in a 3-2 thriller. They crushed Arizona State 3-0, and then they crushed Stanford 3-0. But all of those games were all at home. Now they have to go on the road to Louisville. To me, though, Nebraska was so impressive against Stanford, who had been extremely dominant. I mean, the Cardinal are the number 2 team in the country for a reason, and Nebraska completely obliterated them. That leads me to believe that Nebraska is going to go on the road and beat Louisville 3-2. I think it's going to be a thriller. It's probably going to be one of the biggest college volleyball games of the season. It's probably going to be one of the best games of the season, period, up until postseason play. But I really truly believe Nebraska is going to go on the road and just barely win this one because they have the winner's mentality. But it's going to be very, very, very close. So far with my college volleyball predictions, I'm actually 2-1 because the one matchup I got wrong was picking Tennessee to upset Penn State. But other than that, I actually have done pretty good so far in my limited college volleyball previews. Thank you guys so much for listening to the College Sports Super Fan. Please make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more great content.